I was building a table when she appeared in the doorway, and something about the way she said, "Test its strength with me," made my hands hesitate mid-screw. She stood there, tall and graceful, the kind of presence that seems effortless yet impossible to ignore. Her hair caught the late afternoon light, a soft halo over shoulders that carried both confidence and subtle vulnerability. She wasn't smiling outright, but her eyes, warm, searching, alive, pulled me in like a quiet tide I didn't want to resist. I wiped my hands on my jeans and tried to focus on the wood, but it felt wrong. Every glance I stole toward her made the air thicker, warmer, as if the room itself had leaned closer to watch us. I could smell her faintly, vanilla and something darker, something that lingered like a question, and it made my stomach tighten in a way I had no plan for. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She stepped closer, brushing past me almost casually, though the faint contact of her elbow against mine sent a shiver up my spine. "I trust you," she said softly, but there was a weight behind it, like the words carried more than just confidence, they carried expectation, and maybe a little mischief. Her hand hovered near the edge of the tabletop as if testing its grain, but when it brushed mine, even accidentally, the warmth lingered far longer than it had any right to. My fingers twitched, and I caught myself staring, memorizing the way her hand moved, how her nails caught the light, the subtle shift of her wrist. "Just press down gently," I murmured, though I felt anything but gentle. She leaned in, closer than necessary, the faint scent of her hair brushing my cheek. I realized I could feel her heartbeat, slow but steady, just under the fabric of her blouse. My pulse jumped, a little reckless, as if my body had decided for me what my mind hadn't yet admitted. "Okay," she said, and her voice was a whisper that made me notice the tension in her jaw, the faint hesitation in her stance. Her gaze held mine, unblinking, and I wanted to look away but couldn't. "Not yet." I pressed down on the table, testing the sturdiness of the wood, but all I could feel was the closeness between us, the almost imperceptible warmth of her shoulder brushing mine as she leaned over. My hands shook just enough that I had to shift my weight, hoping she wouldn't notice, but maybe she did. She always noticed. For a long moment, there was only the quiet sound of wood creaking, of breathing, of something unspoken stretching between us. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck somewhere in my throat, tangled with the heat rising in my chest. Then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, a sharp sound made both of us jump, a door opening down the hall, footsteps echoing. She straightened instantly, smoothing her blouse as if nothing had happened, but her glance lingered, fleeting and charged, like a secret barely held in check. She gave me a small, almost mischievous smile and said, "I guess we'll finish this later," before stepping back, letting the world intrude between us, but only for now. And in that space she left, I realized I was already waiting. Waiting for the moment when she would step closer again. I kept my hands busy on the table, sanding down rough edges, but every time I glanced up, she was there again, leaning against the doorway, crossing her arms, that faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I caught myself imagining what it would feel like if she leaned closer, if our shoulders touched for longer than necessary. I shoved the thought away. "Don't. Not here. Not now." Still, the room seemed to conspire against me. The light fell just right, highlighting the lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle grace in the way she shifted her weight. She had a presence that made it impossible to look anywhere else, and dangerous, in a way I didn't quite know how to measure. I remembered snippets she'd let slip the other day, her laughter tinged with nostalgia when she talked about her daughter leaving for college, the quiet ache when she mentioned being alone more than she liked. And me, 20 years younger, fumbling my words, realizing I couldn't untangle the mix of admiration, longing, and something deeper, something I barely understood. "Have you ever built furniture before?" she asked, stepping closer than she needed to. Her breath brushed my ear, a faint warmth that made me swallow hard. I could feel her fingers hover near mine as she inspected a corner joint. Not touching, but close enough that I wanted her to. "Once," I said, keeping my voice even. "But it was a long time ago." She tilted her head, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Curiosity? Challenge? Desire? I couldn't tell, and maybe that was the point. It wasn't just the table. It was the way she made me notice everything, the tilt of her shoulder, the way her hair fell into her eyes, the faint perfume that lingered like a promise. And I knew she noticed me too. I caught her tracing her fingers along the edge of the wood, lingering just slightly where our hands had brushed before. But then she pulled back, as though reminded of some invisible boundary. She smiled, small and knowing, yet there was a tremor and echo of her own hesitation. I realized we were both playing a dangerous game, aware of how precarious the attraction was, my youth, her experience, the way the world might judge if we were careless, if we let the moment slip further. Still, the tension between us was magnetic. Every glance stretched longer, every movement closer, until it almost seemed accidental. I found myself leaning just slightly toward her when she bent over the table, and I swear I felt her pulse quicken against the small of my back. Then, in a quiet, unspoken moment, our hands brushed again, fingers touching lightly as I passed her a clamp. Not enough to call it holding hands, not enough to cross a line, but enough that the warmth lingered. She didn't pull away this time. She didn't have to. We both froze, aware of the electricity that had sparked, that thread of connection that neither of us could name but couldn't ignore. I looked into her eyes, searching for a sign, and found only the same unspoken question mirrored back. The world outside the room could wait. For now, it was just the two of us, standing close enough to feel the air shift, to taste the tension between words left unsaid. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the scrape of my hands against the table. She was standing closer than before, her shoulder brushing mine when she leaned over to inspect a misaligned joint. I felt the warmth surge up my arm, creeping into my chest. "Careful," I murmured, though my voice was tighter than necessary. She glanced at me, eyes soft but teasing, and I caught my breath. Too close, I told myself, but I didn't step back. My fingers lingered near hers as I handed her the measuring tape. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, but enough to make me want more. Then, the sudden ping of a phone broke the moment. I jumped, heart hammering. She pulled back slightly, a flicker of something crossing her face, annoyance? Relief, before she smoothed it away. "Sorry," she said, checking the screen. "It's just work." I nodded, but I could feel the tension settle heavier between us, charged and unspoken. Every glance at her made my stomach tighten. I noticed the way her lips parted slightly when she spoke, how her hair fell forward when she bent over the table, how the faint scent of her perfume made it impossible to think straight. She moved closer again, leaning just slightly against my shoulder, a whisper of warmth. I wanted to reach up, to tuck the stray strand of hair behind her ear, but hesitation froze me. What were we doing? The age gap, the unspoken rules, the judgment waiting outside these walls, they were all sharp edges between us. And yet, I couldn't pull away. My eyes met hers, lingering longer than they should, and I could see her heart in her chest, in the quickening breath, in the subtle tilt of her head toward me. She was testing me, I realized, and I was helpless to resist. The moment stretched thin, each second a taut wire. I felt her hand brush mine again, this time intentionally, or at least I chose to believe it was. My chest tightened. The table wasn't the only thing we were leaning on, it was the fragile barrier between desire and impossibility. "Do you always make things so complicated?" I asked, my voice low, barely more than a sigh. Her lips twitched into a small, almost guilty smile. "I don't know," she said softly. "Maybe it's not the things that are complicated." The words hung in the air, unfinished, leaving me wanting. Closer than ever, I could feel her presence like an invisible tether. Every instinct screamed to lean in, to bridge the distance that shouldn't be bridged. And yet, the world pressed in the consequences, the judgment, the quiet echo of morality. I reached out, almost unconsciously, letting my hand hover near hers, our fingers brushing again in a delicate, electric contact. She didn't pull away this time. She leaned in ever so slightly, a whisper's breath from my lips, and I could feel the heat of her breath, the slow tilt of her face toward mine. And then, the sound of a door opening down the hall froze us both, sharp and real. Her eyes widened, and instinctively, we pulled apart, yet not fully. Not enough to break the connection. My hand still lingered near hers, our shoulders still grazing, hearts still racing. For a fleeting moment, we existed in that dangerous space, closer than ever, yet held back by every reason in the world. The workshop felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in as she stood near the corner, watching me adjust the last leg of the table. Her eyes followed every motion, sharp, curious, and yet heavy with something unspoken. I felt it before I understood it, the pull, the tension, a quiet storm that had been building between us for days. I set the wrench down and finally looked at her, really looked. She was leaning slightly forward, the soft curve of her neck catching the light, her hair falling just enough to brush her cheek. I wanted to reach out, to tuck it behind her ear, to feel the warmth of her skin against my fingers. Instead, my hand hovered midair, trembling. "I can't stop thinking about this," I blurted suddenly, voice low, a little raw. Her eyes widened, but she didn't step back. She let the words sink in, let the air between us thicken. "About what?" she whispered, barely audible, and I could feel her breath on my face. Warm, intoxicating, and impossibly close. "This, I faltered, shaking my head. "I shouldn't, I know. But I can't." She reached out, almost unconsciously, letting her fingers brush my arm. The touch was electric, impossible to ignore. My chest tightened, my pulse thundering in my ears. I could feel her leaning slightly into me, the faint brush of her shoulder against mine sending sparks up my spine. "Stop talking," she said softly, voice low, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Her hand lifted, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and I wanted to reach for it, to feel her skin against mine. But fear held me back, fear of the age gap, of what anyone might think, of crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. I stepped closer, almost instinctively, drawn to her warmth, to the subtle scent that always seemed to linger in her hair. She tilted her head, her lips just inches from mine, eyes half closed, and my throat went dry. My hands itched to touch her face, to feel her lean fully into me, to close the impossible distance that had stretched between us for so long. "Do you want me to stop?" I murmured, my voice barely more than a breath, though my body betrayed every word. She didn't answer, just closed the small distance that remained, her lips so close I could feel the faint exhale of her breath against mine. My heart hammered, threatening to burst from my chest, and for a moment, time suspended, everything else faded into shadows. And then, just as I tilted my head, leaning in to close the gap, the faint click of the workshop door startled us. Both of us froze, caught in the suspended tension, the almost impermissible closeness hanging heavy in the air. Her eyes met mine, wide, searching, electric. She didn't pull away, not fully. Not yet. And I realized, in that breathless instant, that everything had changed. Nothing could go back to the way it was before. I leaned in anyway, daring, desperate, and the world waited with bated breath. I was organizing the scraps of wood when I heard her voice, soft, almost hesitant. "I need to tell you something." I froze mid-step, my fingers still tracing the edge of a plank. She stepped closer, but not too close, like she was balancing the pull of confession against the weight of consequence. The air between us thickened, charged with expectation. "What is it?" I asked, though my chest already felt tight. Her hand brushed mine accidentally, or maybe not, and the warmth lingered far too long. I swallowed hard. I wasn't entirely honest before, about someone else. The words landed heavier than I expected. My stomach clenched. I couldn't tell if it was shock, betrayal, or the sharp thrill of jealousy twisting tight. She watched me, eyes wide, vulnerable, but proud, like she was daring me to react, to judge, to understand. "Someone else?" I whispered, almost inaudible. My hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly, wanting to touch but hesitant, needing to measure the risk. "I didn't lie to hurt you," she said quickly, stepping just a fraction closer. Her shoulder brushed mine briefly, an innocent contact that made my pulse spike. "It's complicated, but I didn't tell you everything about who I've been, and what I've been feeling." I tried to process her words while simultaneously feeling her nearness, the faint scent of her perfume, the soft weight of her shoulder grazing mine, the warmth of her hand when it lingered too close to mine. My thoughts scattered. Every instinct screamed to pull back, yet every fiber of me leaned in, desperate to stay near, to hear more. "Why now?" I asked, my voice low, uneven, betraying the thrum of nerves under my skin. "Because I can't keep pretending," she murmured. Her fingers brushed my arm again, this time lingering a second longer, and I felt the tension spike. The danger, the risk, made everything feel sharper, sweeter, impossible to resist. I stepped closer despite myself, the gap shrinking until the faint warmth of her body pressed almost against mine. She didn't pull away, not fully. Her gaze caught mine, holding, daring me to act, to say something, to cross the line we had been circling since the table first drew us together. The revelation hung between us like smoke, thick, intoxicating, suffocating, yet impossible to ignore. It made me aware of every inch of her, the curve of her neck, the faint tremor in her hand, the way her chest rose and fell in a measured rhythm that somehow synced with my own. I wanted to speak, to confess, to claim her in some quiet, reckless way, but fear gripped me. Fear of judgment, of consequences, of crossing a line neither of us could uncross. And yet, the risk made the pull between us sharper, almost unbearable. She leaned in, just slightly, her breath brushing my cheek. "I can't pretend anymore," she whispered, voice trembling. I didn't step back. I couldn't. The room was smaller than ever, the world outside irrelevant, and in that instant, I realized the decision was mine: retreat, or step into the fire we had been avoiding. My hand lifted, almost unconsciously, toward hers, and the tension stretched taut, electric, undeniable. The workshop had grown unbearably small, every corner pressing in as if the walls themselves were conspiring to trap us together. She stood barely a breath away, and I could feel the heat radiating off her, the faint scent of her hair filling my senses. My hands itched to reach for her, to trace the line of her jaw, but I froze, suspended in the quiet storm of possibility. "I can't pretend anymore," I whispered, my voice rough, betraying the tension coiling in my chest. Her eyes softened, searching mine, and I saw something I hadn't before: relief, recognition, desire wrapped up in fear. She took a step closer, and our shoulders brushed, just enough to send a ripple of awareness straight through me. Her hand hovered near mine, trembling slightly, and I realized we were both holding back, afraid that a single motion could undo everything or finally make it real. "Do you want me to?" she breathed, the words almost lost, barely audible over the quickened beat of our hearts. I didn't answer immediately. I only leaned in, slow, deliberate, letting the space shrink until every nerve ending seemed to hum with awareness. Her eyes fluttered shut for a fraction of a second, and my chest tightened, aching with longing and fear. I started, then stopped, the weight of hesitation dissolving in the intensity of the moment. Her hand brushed my cheek, tentative, searching, and that small, electric touch broke whatever barrier was left. We didn't kiss, at least, not yet, but the closeness was enough. Our foreheads nearly touched, breaths mingling, and I could feel the tremor in her body, the rise and fall of her chest matching my own. It was messy, real, human, two people raw with want, tangled in tension, and finally letting themselves feel it fully. "I've wanted this," she murmured, voice quivering, "for longer than I should have. And I've been terrified," I admitted, my fingers brushing hers, holding her hand lightly, memorizing the warmth. Terrified I'd ruin it, or that the world wouldn't understand. She laughed softly, a sound that trembled with relief and joy. "Then let's stop being careful," she said, and the words hung between us like a promise, like a dare. In that suspended moment, everything aligned: the years between us, the risks, the judgments, they all faded. What mattered was this, right here, right now. We leaned in together, inch by inch, letting the closeness linger, letting the tension curl around us like smoke. And in that shared breath, in the electricity of trembling hands and racing hearts, clarity came. We understood each other, fully, recklessly, irrevocably. There was no pretending anymore, no hiding behind hesitation or fear. The pull was mutual, undeniable, and we were ready to follow it, wherever it might lead. The world outside the workshop could wait. For the first time, I didn't care. The workshop was quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun slipping through dusty windows. The table stood finished between us, solid and real, a small testament to what we had built together, fragile in its beginning, now complete. She leaned against the edge, fingers tracing the smooth wood, and I felt the gentle heat of her shoulder against mine. I didn't move away. I couldn't. The tension that had haunted us all week had finally settled, replaced by something tender, grounded, and undeniably ours. "I'm glad we did this," she murmured, not about the table, but about us. Her hand brushed against mine, light and deliberate, and I caught it, intertwining our fingers like a promise we didn't need to speak aloud. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the subtle traces of vulnerability still tucked behind her confidence. I saw the warmth in her gaze, the way her eyes softened when they landed on mine, and I felt my own walls fall away. "Me too," I whispered. I've never felt anything like this before. She laughed softly, a little breathless, and it was full of relief and disbelief, as if she was finally allowing herself to exist in this moment. I thought maybe you'd be different, she said, voice low, teasing, yet sincere. Younger, impatient, reckless. And I thought you'd be untouchable, I admitted, letting my thumb brush across her knuckles. Confident, distant, impossible to reach. Her head tilted toward me, and without thinking, I leaned down, resting my forehead against hers. The contact was intimate and quiet, electric in its simplicity. We didn't need words, our shared breath, the gentle press of skin against skin, said everything we were too tangled in fear to admit before. I pulled her closer, letting her settle against me fully, the warmth of her body pressing into mine, familiar and grounding. We stayed that way, suspended in a moment that felt like the world had finally shrunk to only us. Age doesn't matter, she murmured, the words barely more than a breath. It never did. I held her tighter, feeling the truth in every syllable. It didn't matter. What mattered was the honesty, the closeness, the willingness to let ourselves fall into something real messy, complicated, impossible to ignore. We stayed there until the light shifted, until shadows crept across the table, until the hum of the workshop became a steady, quiet rhythm underlining our peace. Fingers intertwined, hearts slowing, we finally let ourselves rest in the certainty we had been building toward all along. And as we pulled back just slightly, sharing a small, knowing smile, I realized that the story between us was only just beginning, but for the first time, it felt safe to feel it fully, without hesitation. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?